They brought in top engineers, cutting-edge AI experts, and tried everything they could, but the Navy's newest ship was stranded, powerless. That was until a retired sailor showed up. All he had was a tattered notebook, a rusty wrench, and 30 years of experience. "Sir, propulsion's gone again," Lieutenant Mark Carter reported, standing rigid in the control room of the USS Horizon. His face had gone pale, and his words seemed to hang heavily in the air. The room fell into silence. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Captain Claire Davis stepped forward, boots clicking on the steel floor. "Define again, Lieutenant," she demanded. "Main hybrid unit failed again," Carter said, voice lowering. "Manual restart didn't work. It's not responding to the backup protocols either." The chief engineer, Samuel Thompson, cursed under his breath as he stared at the diagnostic screen. He hadn't looked up in hours. It was day 3 of a supposed-to-be 5-day classified mission off the coast of Los Angeles. The Horizon, worth nearly $4.5 billion, was now completely useless. No propulsion, no power to its weapons, and a communication system barely functioning. This ship was one of the Navy's most advanced, boasting a hybrid propulsion system that no one thought could fail. It combined electric turbines with gas propulsion, all managed by an AI system that monitored engine health in real time. Now, all of that expertise had turned into a costly failure. In the engine room, the air was thick with tension. A dozen engineers huddled around diagnostic stations, sweat dripping from their brows. Software had been reinstalled, parts replaced, and the AI rebooted twice. Still, the system was unresponsive. At 0400 hours, Captain Davis made the call. "Enough guessing," she said, pacing in the briefing room. "We need someone outside this team to look at this." Commander Jake Williams, head of the engineering division aboard the Horizon, frowned. "This won't sit well with command." "They hand-picked this team for a reason," Davis countered, meeting his gaze. "But this team hasn't fixed it." She knew what this meant. The Horizon was one of the fleet's crown jewels. If word got out that it had malfunctioned so soon after its deployment, heads would roll. Likely hers would be first. Though reluctant, the higher-ups agreed. A series of emails and calls began, eventually leading to the Navy's top propulsion experts being contacted. But they all refused. Too many unknowns, they said. The risk to their reputation was too high. By the start of day 3, morale had sunk so low that the crew had given up on trying to pretend everything was fine. In the mess hall, silence hung thick in the air. Even the younger sailors, usually brimming with sarcasm and jokes, sat quietly. Some stared at their food, others refused to make eye contact. Then the call came through. "Captain, command has approved an outside consultant. He'll be here in 5 hours." Davis raised an eyebrow. "Who's the consultant?" "Raymond Ellis," came the reply. She nodded, turning to walk out, a storm of thoughts brewing in her mind. But 5 hours aboard a ship that felt like it had given up was more time than anyone wanted to spend. The crew's frustration was palpable. The entire ship seemed to be suffocating under the weight of its failure. When Raymond Ellis finally arrived, it wasn't in the dramatic fashion they'd expected. A Black Hawk helicopter landed on the deck with the usual noise and chaos, but the man who stepped out wasn't wearing a uniform, nor did he carry any high-tech gadgets. Instead, he wore a worn-out jacket, an ancient stethoscope hanging from his neck, and held a tattered notebook in one hand. His boots were scuffed and battered. "Who's this guy?" muttered Chief Thompson, squinting in disbelief. Ellis ignored the comment. Without saying a word, he scanned the engineers and asked, "Where's the engine room?" The crew followed him, unsure what to expect. As they descended the levels, Ellis didn't ask for data, diagnostics, or reports. Instead, he asked just one thing: "What's she running on?" "GE Hybrid Core System," answered Sarah Chin, the civilian engineer. "Last-gen code with a semi-autonomous diagnostic shell." "Not doing much of anything, though," added Commander Williams, shaking his head. Ellis didn't flinch. He simply nodded, walked up to the door of the engine room, and tapped the wall with his fingers, listening to the vibrations. Then, without missing a beat, he said, "Don't touch anything until I've heard her." Inside the engine room, The crew stood back as Ellis knelt next to the massive hybrid core. He pressed his old stethoscope against the machinery and stood completely still. It was unsettling to watch. Minutes passed in silence. No one moved, no one dared speak. Finally, Ellis straightened up and asked, "Who adjusted the heat sink capacitors after the last shutdown?" A young sailor raised her hand, looking uncertain. "I did," she said. "I followed the default procedure." Ellis shook his head. "You did it wrong. But it's not your fault. That procedure was designed for clean installs, not for a failing system." His voice was calm but sharp as he turned to Commander Williams. "Ever try to reset a circuit while someone's welding the power line?" Williams blinked, confused. "That's what you're doing," Ellis continued. "You're fighting the system while trying to restart it. She's not broken. She's just in defense mode." The engineers stared, stunned by the revelation. "Wait, this thing is defending itself?" Sarah asked quietly. Ellis didn't respond directly. Instead, he scratched something down in his notebook. "Most machines don't react like this, not unless they've been through something first. The AI isn't just smart, it's scared." Captain Davis arrived just in time to witness the engineers start working under Ellis's direction. She didn't speak. She just watched as an old man with no credentials, no formal training in modern tech, took charge of the ship, taking it apart and putting it back together in a way no one else had thought to. What followed was something no one could have predicted. In the next few hours, Ellis's steady hands worked magic on the ship's heart. The engineers followed his lead, pulling parts, adjusting components, and rewiring things with precision. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of tense silence, Ellis gave the order, "Cycle the power, don't rush it. Let her come back on her own." The crew hesitated as they flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then there was a hum. A low, steady vibration. The AI diagnostics flickered, then stabilized. Propulsion interfaces were online. The ship was back. "I didn't guess," Ellis said quietly, watching the lights blink green. "I listened." The crew exchanged looks, some starting to clap, but Ellis just stood there, hands in his pockets. He wasn't there for applause. He wasn't there for recognition. He was there because the ship had called for help. A few hours later, Raymond was on his way off the ship, his job done. As the transport helicopter lifted off, Captain Davis approached him. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice softer now. Ellis turned to her. "I almost didn't." "Then why didn't you say no?" He paused. "Because when a ship calls for help, someone should answer." As Raymond Ellis descended the helicopter stairs and stood at the edge of the deck, the feeling of quiet satisfaction settled in. His work on the horizon had been swift, yet profound. For the first time in days, the ship hummed beneath their feet, alive once again. The tension, once suffocating, had lifted. But that wasn't the end, at least not for Ellis. He wasn't about to let the faint claps and subdued praises get to him. It wasn't about recognition, it never had been. The truth was simpler, quieter, and deeper. "She's back in tune," Ellis had muttered, his hands rough with the kind of knowledge that can only be earned through years of listening, learning, and failing. "But I didn't fix her for you. I fixed her for the ship." And the ship, well, it was more than a collection of engines, wires, and codes. It had rhythm, history, a soul of sorts. Machines, when they're treated like machines, tend to forget that. But when a man like Raymond Ellis steps in, someone who has spent his life listening, not to what's in the manuals, but to what's unsaid, to the hum of a machine's heartbeat, that's when something miraculous happens. The horizon had been a marvel of modern technology. When it first sailed, everyone had marveled at its sleek lines, its advanced systems, and its power. But somewhere along the way, it became more of a showpiece than a ship. It was built to be perfect, to be the solution to every problem, but in the process, it had forgotten that even the most intelligent systems need a dose of humility. When the horizon failed, it wasn't because the technology was flawed, it was because the system didn't understand that things can go wrong. Technology doesn't account for everything. But experience, the kind that only comes with time and the willingness to make mistakes, that could save the day. For years, Ellis had been out of the game. He could have remained in his garage, content with the quiet life he had carved for himself. But when Admiral Pike called, he knew the ship was asking for something only he could provide. The irony, of course, was that the Navy had created a ship so advanced, so intelligent, that it had forgotten to listen. They were so focused on building smarter, faster, more powerful systems that they had forgotten that there was a simpler way to solve problems: listening. Listening wasn't a skill you could measure in algorithms or equations. It wasn't something that could be recorded in a manual or trained through software. It was about understanding the patterns, the shifts, the small changes that no one else noticed. It was about stepping back when everyone else rushed forward, taking the time to hear what was going wrong and addressing it from the ground up. When Raymond had entered the engine room of the Horizon, the ship's heart was silent. The pulse that should have been there was missing. The AI interface was flashing useless error codes, the machinery dead to the world. But Ellis had stepped in, not as a technician or a scientist, but as someone who knew that machines, like people, don't always work in predictable ways. They had their own rhythm. When you learned it, you could anticipate what was coming next. That's what Ellis had done. He'd read the ship the way someone reads a weather report, knowing that before the storm hits, the air shifts. The ship had been in distress, and Ellis was the only one who knew how to listen to the signs. Captain Claire Davis had watched him work, unsure at first. What had she expected? A miracle? A flawless, quick fix from a man she thought was just an old mechanic? But as the hours went by, as the ship slowly came back to life under Raymond's hands, something changed. Her respect for him grew, not because of his technical prowess but because of his humility. Unlike the others who relied on the latest diagnostic tools, Ellis had no use for fancy technology. He relied on something far more valuable: his instinct. His willingness to trust his senses over the screens and gadgets everyone else had faith in. There was something poetic about that. And it was that same instinct, the ability to get to the root of a problem without overcomplicating things, that Captain Davis would carry with her long after Raymond Ellis had left the ship. She would remember the lesson he taught her, not about fixing ships but about fixing people and their approach to problems. So much of the military was built on systems, on rigid procedures that promised efficiency. But Ellis had shown her that sometimes, in the chaos of innovation and progress, something vital gets lost. The person's ability to listen, to feel the subtle vibrations that tell you when something is off. That skill is timeless. As the days passed and the Horizon continued to glide through the water, now stabilized and operational once more, the crew began to notice a shift. The air, once thick with frustration and doubt, had lifted. They weren't just moving again, they were learning to listen to the ship as Ellis had taught them. The engineers went back to their consoles, now with a different mindset. They began to realize that there was more to a system than data points. There was the feeling of it, the way it responded to stress, the way it pushed back when something wasn't quite right. They had all the tools and knowledge to fix the ship, but Ellis had reminded them of the one thing no software could replace: intuition. Back at the naval base, however, things weren't so simple. The top brass still couldn't understand why the situation had been allowed to escalate to this point. Their questions were relentless. Why had the Horizon failed? Why had their most advanced engineers and technicians been unable to fix the problem? Why had an old, retired chief been the one to solve it? The truth, as Ellis had said, wasn't comfortable. The Horizon had failed because the Navy had built a ship so advanced that it couldn't see the forest for the trees. They had relied on automation, on data, on AI, and forgotten the very simple truth that sometimes a machine needs to be understood, not just fixed, but listened to. As Ellis sat back in his garage, elbows deep in another old engine, he wasn't thinking about the Navy's questions. He didn't care about the accolades or the reports that would be filed. What mattered to him was that the ship was alive again. The hum he'd heard on the Horizon was the sound of success, quiet, unassuming, but unmistakable. It wasn't about saving the day for the Navy, it was about saving the ship. It was about reminding people that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. Then, of course, the call came again. This time, it wasn't from Pike, but from Commander Lien Cho, who was leading a training revision task force at the Naval Engineering School in Gulfport. Ellis listened to her request to talk to some of the trainees, to teach them about the things you don't find in manuals. The question she asked wasn't whether he was still capable, it was whether he would pass on his knowledge to the next generation. And for the first time, Ellis found himself considering it. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to his story than fixing ships. Maybe his experience, the lessons he'd learned from years of working with machines that didn't always follow the rules, was something worth sharing. As he stood there, staring at the photo of his wife, Jeanette, on the wall of his garage, Raymond knew one thing for sure: his work was far from finished. There were still ships to fix, still systems to listen to, and still lessons to be passed on. And maybe, just maybe, the next generation would learn to listen too. After all, the ships wouldn't be the only ones who needed fixing.